Good morning. This is, or good afternoon, I guess it depends on what time you're watching this. This is the beginning of anatomy and physiology for the first of two parts, I should say. There's the first part that we're going to do, which is pretty much the intro, the molecular biology, and then through some of the systems, and then for the next half of anatomy and physiology for your next semester will be the rest of the body systems. So the first half of this course, even for this semester, is really just going to be focusing on a lot of the microbiology portion of this and how the cells work. And I'll just discuss the difference between what anatomy is and what physiology is during this chapter to kind of get you an idea of how we're going to divide this class. Really, it isn't anything new. We have been, as a human race, basically, or human species, we have been looking at the human body since we've had basically curiosity and I guess time to do so. We've looked at the body. We've tried to heal the body from various different diseases, and it's always been a source of curiosity for us. So you can go back in and you can look at, artwork like you see here from from old times, centuries ago. But you can also go back millennia too. The Greeks and the Romans and Mayans and all that kind of stuff had ways of dealing with what was going wrong with the human body and how to sort of discover what it was with it and how to correct things. Just sort of a basic curiosity about ourselves. All right, so this course and the second half of this course, next semester's course, is basically about two different things, and probably hadn't really even thought about the difference between them, but it is anatomy and it is physiology. Anatomy really is just looking at structure. So this is a down with this course, this is pretty much going to be the memorization part. What is the structure? Where is the structure? Okay. The physiology is a little more complex because this is the study of function, and you can't really divide structure and function from things. The structure of an organ or an organelle or any sort of part of a cell even really determines its function. So you have structure and function really tied together. They're complementary and they go together, and you can't really divide the two. So we have to talk about both when we talk about this class. But physiology, then, when we talk about the function, becomes a little more complex. And this is much more on the analytical part. So this is the part that we'll spend most time in lecture generally on. But like I said, you can't divide the two. So I have to talk about structure in lecture in order to get to function in lecture also. But as far as the lab portion is really primarily just structure. What does it look like? Where is it located? What's the name of it? That kind of stuff. That's primarily where you're going to be doing straight up memorization for the class, and it's just learning those things. But then we tie that back in with function. So in lecture, like I said, I'll talk about structure, but I'll tie it back into function. And when it comes to lecture tests, that's going to make that a little more difficult because it's not just what is it. Now you got to know how does it work and what are the processes that get it to work. So you have to do a little more analysis through things. Anything you see in biology, most sciences, but biology specifically and anatomy and physiology itself comes from either Greek or Latin. So you're going to have a whole bunch of foreign sounding words, and they really are. They're Greek based or they're Latin based. The first two words that we have to learn for this class, anatomy and physiology, both come from Greek root words. Anatomy meaning a cutting up or dividing something into its small pieces so that you can study it. So we're looking at, the skull versus the rib cage or something. So cutting up into sections to better study it. And then physiology goes back to that function with it's a relationship to nature. How does it work? What is the function? What's going to cause it to work, and what's going to cause it to go wrong if the all the pieces aren't there, all the players aren't there to make something work correctly. Okay, and like I said, you cannot divide the two. Structure dictates function. If I change the structure, I change the function. So if something goes wrong with the shape of something, so say your heart, right? Your heart has two atria, two ventricles. Looks more like Mickey Mouse, but y'all have to get used to my drawings. With these, the aorta coming out and pulmonary vessels and everything coming in. So this should probably be more like this. But anyway, so it has this, and you have this septum down the center. So atria receive blood, and then the ventricles pump blood back out. All right. It's actually going to go out a different vessel, coming in here, and then go out the aorta. So you have this going on. Well, what happens if there's a problem with that heart? So here's my two atria again. Here's my main structure, my heart with my ventricles down here, and your vessels coming out. All right. So what happens if maybe between these two atria there's a gap, a hole that doesn't seal, that's supposed to be in there? Then you're going to have problems with the structure of that heart, but it's also going to dictate the function. Now that heart is not going to pump blood correctly to the right structures, like to the lungs, to the body, or wherever it has, and you're going to hear things wrong with it. Same with like the valves that you would find between the atria and the ventricles. So this is the atria, this is the ventricle, and the ventricles and the vessels going out of the heart. What happens if the structure of those valves are incorrect? Then you're going to hear swooshing sounds and stuff, and you might have, instead of this one-way flow of blood out, you're going to have a backflow of blood because those chambers can't seal off completely. So again, structure is going to dictate that function, and if something happens to that structure, then the function just really isn't going to be correct in there, and that's what we're going to refer to as diseases. Okay, diseases or disorders, right, is when something is going wrong with the body. All right. Okay, so let's talk about anatomy and what anatomy is going to entail first. So we're going to start with that, and then we'll come back to the physiology of it. And this is really just, again, what does it look like? So we have different ways of looking at this. We can look at the surface structure of something, just, hold a bone in your hand and look at the bone and see all the different structures on there. We can go in on a larger scale and take a cadaver, like a human body that has been donated to science, and do that dissection. That's usually something that's done in med school or dental school or something, one of those higher schools. After you've got through your undergrad, you usually get to that high, just because of the cost that's involved. There's a lot of money that's involved in the maintenance of those cadavers and all of the equipment that really you have to properly care for those cadavers, because once a body has been donated to a campus, it's really considered as buried there until it's buried in another place. So you really have a lot of laws that govern the correct and the ethical consideration of that cadaver. But it does give you a nice overview because it's actually a human body. Generally in undergraduate classes like this, we're not going to look at the entire human body. We'll look at models, okay? And we'll look at other structures or other organisms that have similar structure and build. So we tend to look at comparative anatomy more so in this class, so or on this level. So take one species that's close to us. So what we do is we generally take another mammal that, because their lungs, their heart, their interior structures, even their cellular components are going to be pretty much the same. There's some differences based off of feeding types and things, whether they're herbivores or they're carnivores or whatever. There's going to be different, a little bit differences in there, but generally it's close enough that it's the same thing. So mammals, some schools use cats. I've seen ferrets, I think, or ferrets. The other one is rats. Rats are nice and cheap, so we use rats a lot of time in class. But all of these are types of mammals, so their structures are going to be very, very similar to the human ones, and we can use that to get a general idea of compare it back to a human. All right. Physical examination. So instead of taking something that's either dead or a model of something, we can actually look at a living individual in this case. And a physical examination is what a doctor would do to you. So palpate is like touching. Okay, so touching or feeling. You can touch the upper abdominal region, just below the rib cage, and on the right side, and you can feel the liver, and your doctor may touch around in there to see if you have a swollen liver, indicating something like hepatitis or something. Auscultation is listening for sounds. Okay, so that would be using like a stethoscope to listen for sounds on there, in the heart or in the lungs, breathing when they say breathe in, breathe out. They're listening for echoes or raspy sounds or whooshes like in the heart or something. Percussion goes back to percussive type therapy. And percussion, you're taking it and you're just, let's see if I can get up a little bit. You're kind of like tapping and then listening as they tap to see the sound that comes back from that. So we can tell things like tapping on the back. So your doctor, when he's looking at you, might tap a little bit on the back while he's listening, and that gives them some idea of the like the lungs should be fairly hollow sounding, but if there's fluids or something gathered in there, they can see that they can hear that kind of stuff. Gross anatomy. Gross just means the large picture. So gross really means large, big in French there. But gross anatomy is the big picture, or what I could see without needing something special. So I'm not going to need a microscope or anything to look at it. I can see your face. I can see your eyes on the general. I can't see, things like the receptors on your retina, but I can see your eye as a whole. So that's gross anatomy. Histology is that microscopic. So this is on a micro scale. This is what we call macro, by the way. Macro means large. Micro is small. And you do need special equipment like a microscope to look at that. So I'm going to look at individual cells, or with histology, I'm going to look at groups of cells that we call tissues and study that on a smaller scale, because everything builds. So the cells determine tissues determine organs determine the organism. So you have this whole cascade effect going on in there. So we really need to know what's going on with the tissues in order to see how the rest of it's built. Like I said, there's been studies. You can go way back in time, and people have studied the human body. Sometimes it wasn't legal to do so. So you see a lot of early drawings, like in these pictures here, with medical doctors and stuff that took, they had to hire people to go steal bodies out of graves to go look at the bodies. In the Roman times, they had something called vivisection. They were allowed to take criminals and dissect them alive to see what the heart was doing, what the lungs were doing. Highly unethical. Not something we can do today. You're not going to just study a live person to see what their organs are doing. What happens if I do this? So you can't do that now, but different laws, different times, different availabilities, from absolutely no access to human bodies in the 14, 15, 1600s to what we have now with body donations and cadavers that we can use for study of deceased individuals, to vivisections. All right. Now, physiology then goes back to the function. So this is not looking at something and just saying this is what it is, and I see how it's shaped. This is how. How does this work? Okay, so we have to use some sort of experimental science to go in there and test. What happens if I don't allow this specific chemical to be available to the cell? What's not going to work? Obviously, if something stops working that was working, then I know that that chemical was vital to that portion of the cell function. So we're using experimental science to figure out how it is that these structures do their jobs. And again, we can go back and use comparative. We're not necessarily always going to be using a human in here. A bunch of medical trials and pharmaceutical trials and all kinds of stuff go back to comparative physiology by using rats and then primates and different things to get very close to what a human, or how human cells would actually react to these things before they put them out on the market for humans. So using these, again, mammals that are really closely related, that will give you an idea of what the possible outcomes are. Is this medicine effective, or this drug effective, or is it not going to be effective? And what are the side effects if we do put it out there on the market? We need to know those things ahead of time before you market it, sell it, and then have a whole bunch of side effects that you weren't accounting on. All right, this chapter skips around a lot. Since it's an introductory chapter, you're going to see that it kind of skips sort of concepts and ideas pretty quickly in here. So the next concept, we're looking at levels of organization. It's all leading you to the sorts of things you need to keep in mind for the rest of the year. All these little pieces that I'm throwing at you with this chapter, but this is one of those too. We always, as human beings, we have to organize things. You have to organize your files. You have to organize your closet. You have to, if you want to find it again, you need to organize it. So that's how our brains work, is to organize things. We do that with the human body too. And no matter what level we start at, there's always a smaller level. And no matter what level we end at, there's always a larger level. But we're going to narrow our focus and say, this is where I want to be. What works for this class, that's all you need to know. Okay, so we're going to start out, and this is the subject of the next chapter actually, but the subatomic particles. Subatomic particles means below atomic, so the atom but less than an atom. So what are the things, the components that would make up an atom? And an atom by definition is just the smallest unit of matter. So what particles make those up? And there's three. We can get smaller than these three things too, but for this class, this is what you need to know, okay? Protons with a positive charge, electrons with a negative charge, and then we have these neutral particles called neutrons. They don't have a charge. Once again, this is going to be the subject of the next chapter, so I'm just going to introduce it here, and then we'll come back and really talk about it later. So if I get a bunch of these guys together, I organize them in a specific way. You have to organize them in a specific way. It's not random, right? But I get this organization of those, then I can build an atom. So one atom or different atoms, depends on the organization that I had of these little subatomic particles. One proton leads to one type of atom, two protons is a different atom. So that organization really dictates, again, the function at the next level. But like hydrogen, okay, is one type of atom. Carbon is another. And there's a lot. There's some that we need to know for this class because they're part of living organisms, so therefore they're part of the human body. We'll spend time with those in the upcoming chapters too, and then throughout the semester, because it's something that comes back over and over again. But which atoms are really specifically important to the human body? We'll spend time with that. I'm not going to go into uranium and different things. Although on a medical level, I guess that would be important. All right, molecule. So if I take a bunch of atoms and I put them together in a specific structure, again, that structure will become a molecule, and that molecule has a specific function. So water is 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, and that's what defines water. If I change that and I've got 3 hydrogens and something else, I don't have water anymore. I have a specific structure. And water, is something you're familiar with. That's a molecule. 1 molecule of water is not much. We have to put a whole bunch of molecules together to actually get the water that you drink. Glucose is another common molecule that we see in living organisms. Glucose is our basic energy source. And you can tell by its structural formula here that says this molecule, it's got 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. Okay, so specific structure again. Now, if I take several waters and I put them together, so another one, or I take glucose and I add fructose to it, which by the way has the same chemical formula but a different structure. If I add those together, then I get something a little more complex than a single molecule, okay? So if I start adding other things to these, right, I'm going to get the next level. And the next level is just called a macromolecule. And remember, I introduced that term a little bit earlier. Macro means large or big. So this is a large molecule, where a molecule itself is the basic, the smallest structure that still has that sort of that function. A macromolecule is a bunch of these put together in some way, or a bunch of different molecules put together in some way. There's 4 basic macromolecule groups that we're going to look at in this class. Now I can break them down, like protein is one of those groups, nucleic acid is one of those groups, but then you have specific types of proteins. So I have lactase is one protein, hemoglobin would be another protein, totally different functions, but they're within that group of proteins. Sorry, that's my husband's phone. Nucleic acids is another type of macromolecule, and DNA is one example of that. That would be where your genetic information is found. Polysaccharide means many sugars. So if I took a bunch of these glucose and I put them together and strung them all together, added them together, I would get what's called a polysaccharide. Again, this is the subject of the upcoming chapter. So we've got a couple chapters coming up that really talk about atoms, and then they talk about the macromolecules and everything and how that affects us and why it's important to us. If I take a bunch of macromolecules, different types, so some protein and some carbohydrates and some lipids, and I put them together in a specific structure, I'm going to get an organelle. An organelle just means small organ. We're familiar with organs. Organs are things like the heart and the stomach. An organelle is a structure inside a cell. So this is only inside the cell. So at the smallest unit, we have a cell, you have a nucleus, and then you have these little structures in here like a mitochondrion, which would be for energy. There's the nucleus that has the DNA in it. So a bunch of these put together, and I'm going to eventually get to that next part, which is the cell, right? But I have to have the organelles inside of it to make a cell. So this makes ATP energy. This holds the DNA. You know, they all have their own specific function within a specific cell. And then we have all these different types of cells. So I have muscle cells that are used for contraction, therefore movement. Nerve cells that conduct impulses, so they transmit information. You have stomach cells, you have skin cells, you have all these specialized cells that have jobs, but they're all filled with different types of organelles. Now, if I take a bunch of cells, next step up, bunch of cells. So I have one muscle cell, but I need to put a whole bunch of muscle cells together and nerve cells to give them information to say, hey, contract, blood cells to feed them with energy. Put all that together, and I get to this level we call tissue. So tissues are just a bunch of cells working together for a specific function, all right? We have 4. Again, this is an entire chapter coming up that's going to deal with this. Epithelial tends to be linings of things. So your skin or the inside of your mouth, digestive tract, that kind of stuff are epithelial cells. Muscle, they contract. So movement like skeletal muscle, or contract to pump blood like the cardiac muscle, okay? There's 3 types of muscle. We'll get to that. Nervous tissue is specifically for conducting impulses and storing information like your memory and your thoughts and your things like that. That's all part of that nervous system. It communicates from one part of the body to the rest of the body. And then connective tissue is this highly complex group of very different types of cells that have all the other functions in the body that I didn't mention yet. But we can put all of our cell types into these tissues, and there's 4 tissue types. Then a bunch of tissues together, and I finally get to what we think of as an organ. So your heart is a combination of different tissues. There's cardiac muscle, so there's muscle there that helps to constrict. But there's also blood that runs to it. Oops, I did something funky there, but there's blood that runs to it, and blood's part of that connective tissue. There's binding tissues in between the muscles and around the heart too, and that falls into that connective. Your heart has nervous tissue. Something has to tell it to keep contracting, so the nervous tissue sends that to that. So you even have an inner lining, by the way, the heart that's made up the epithelial. So a heart muscle is an organ because it contains different types of tissues. The same with your skin. We think of our skin as just this lining, but your skin is primarily, or your heart's primarily like this cardiac muscle with everything else helping out. Your skin is primarily epithelial, but you have some muscles embedded, you have nervous tissue embedded, you have a lot of connective tissue holding it all together. Femur, we don't think of our bones as being an organ, but they are. So the femur is a bone, and that's going to be connective tissue primarily. So you've got bone is in that connective group, plus you've got blood flowing into the femur, so there's connective tissue there. You've got ligaments and tendons that are involved, again, more connective tissue. I've got nervous tissue that runs through the bones also. And I'm going to have muscles attached to that that's more exterior, but there will be some muscle attachment to that femur. So you're going to have many different types of connective tissue, and then some nervous tissue and some others in there too. So remember, organ is just different tissues, whether it's in all one group or generally more likely a little bit from several different types of tissues to make that organ. And then I take a bunch of organs, your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine, your esophagus, and your mouth, and I have an entire system like the digestive system, okay? So that's more than one organ. That's several organs working together for a specific function. But you got to also remember that organ systems, even though they have a function, digestive system is to bring in food and water, to break it down, absorb it. It has to work interactively and very closely with things like the circulatory system. So you have to have other systems that work very closely with it, and the nervous system. Nervous system is going to be a part of everything, by the way. The skeletal system works with the always with the circulatory system, but also with the nervous system and with the muscular system, and it's everything interacts with each other. It's not just isolated by itself. It's all this combined effort. But we have several different organ systems. Now, for this class, throughout the class, we're going to do our first organ system will be dealing with the skin, the integumentary system. We'll do the muscular system, the joints that go along with that. We'll do nervous system at the end. We're going to do a few of the systems. We've told you most of the first half of this class is really on the micro level. So it's really kind of up to this point right in here. The second half of the class will be beginning with some organ systems. You'll do most of the organ systems like circulatory, digestive, endocrine, and that kind of stuff in the next half. However, since this class, this semester also includes this intro, you do need to know some basic, you need to know what all the organ systems are, and you need to know their basic functions. So do get to know their functions, even if we're not going to delve into those directly until next semester. All right, and then a bunch of organ systems, and I finally have human, or whatever organism we have. But since we're in a human anatomy and physiology class, this is kind of what the level we're aiming to get to. Okay, so here it is picture-wise. So subatomic, remember those are protons, neutrons, and electrons. Then put those together in a specific order. I get an atom, add a bunch of atoms. So I've got oxygen in red there and hydrogen over here. And I've got a molecule, a bunch of molecules. Notice how much bigger that macromolecule is. That's even a small one. So the water would be embedded in here in this like small little section right here. But it's a lot of those put together. It's not just like one or two. It's generally a big group. And then I take different types of macromolecules and I can make an organelle. So this is the mitochondrion in this picture, and it's got a phospholipid membrane. So it's got a bunch of fats that make the membrane. It's got a fluid interior. It's got little ribosomes inside of it and DNA inside of it. So it's got a bunch of these different types of macromolecules making that up. It has a specific job within the cell. So it's going to be one thing inside this larger cell doing its job to help keep that cell alive, right? But everybody else is going to have their own little part to help keep that cell alive. Then that cell works as a larger group with tissue. So there's a whole bunch of different types of cells in this tissue, organ system, and so on to you in the end, the organism. So that's micro working up to macro at the end, okay? This is like submicro, but in subatomic, but we can't even see that you can't see like this level. And you can see some of this level with a microscope. They're too small. All right. So we also need to think about how we're going to learn about the body. We learn sort of the basics. This is the standardized. So standard is a good word to use there. We learn what a standard human being, the average human being looks like, and the organs that they have and what their organs are going to be like, because that's the majority of everybody. Okay. But in reality, not everybody's exactly alike. We have differences, and you can see those differences, like when you look at somebody's face, but you also have differences sometimes with these organs. So, we all have a heart, or you wouldn't have developed into the human being that would have developed into no baby. But your heart may not be exactly like everybody else's heart. So we all have this heart, and we think of it with two atria, two ventricles, and it does this job. But sometimes people have variations in that. So there's variable numbers of organs sometimes. When we talk about the bones, I'll tell you there's about 206. Well, 206 is the average. So that's the normal amount for the normal human being. But some people have a few bones extra here and there. It's not doing them any damage or harm. It's not giving them an advantage. It's just the way they were built. So there may be a little bit more, a little bit less in different things. For the most part, when we look at the overall thing, we don't do well with too much or too little. Okay, we have to have the exact right amount. We have to have it structured exactly the right way because I want the function to be exactly the right way. But in some cases, you can have a little variability and it's not going to hurt too much. So there can be different numbers of bones. But my sister-in-law was born with 2 ureters. So coming out of the kidney, I'm going to try and draw a kidney here. You have blood vessels coming in, and then you have the ureter coming out. So here's my ureter coming out, and that's going to go to the bladder. All right. So urine is formed in the kidney, and then the ureter takes that and drops that urine into the bladder where it's stored until you get rid of it. Right. Well, she was born with 2. Okay. It's like, well, 2 is good because you got twice as much. 2 is bad. That led to infections, that led to kidney problems, and she's still suffering with things. She had to have surgery to have that fixed, okay, so that she only had the one that was working. So it's not good to have necessarily more than one for most things or have things the wrong way. And sometimes it can cause some really drastic problems with the individual. Sometimes they can go their whole life without ever knowing that they have something that's really wrong with them. So, and it could be the same thing that caused big problems in somebody else, so, each individual's body deals with it in different ways. We can also have a variation in location. So where we think, the heart sits right here, by the way, here. So coming down here, the heart really is not, we cross our heart and we do it over here. The heart is in the center right here. Now it does have a little apex right here. So the tip is the apex, and that leans towards that left side. So that's why we kind of think of it as being on that side, but it's really in the middle. It's between your 2 lungs. It's in the middle right here underneath your sternum. That's why you do pressings right there. But sometimes people have it face the wrong way, or they have it flipped. Okay. So you may have a difference in location. And we have these different names for that. Inversus means like flipped. Okay. I think I have a picture. Okay. This is somebody who has what we call totalis. Usually it's one organ. In this picture, you have an individual who's completely flipped. So everything's flipped. The right lung and the left lung, you would think, well, they're lungs, that doesn't matter. But they should be on the right side and the left side. And there are differences in their structure. In some individuals, like this individual here, the right and the left are flipped. And look at the liver. The liver placement is flipped, and that means the stomach is flipped. And so the whole digestive system is flipped, and the respiratory system there. So that's an entire mirror image sort of thing going on. That's inversus, but this one is actually totalis. A lot of times it's just one organ that does that, or a couple organs. Dextrocardia is, you can see it here. So here's dextrocardia in this infant. So here's that apex I was talking about. So the heart is centrally located, right? Here's the little apex on the end, and it points sort of down in that direction like this. Okay, this child's is going that way. So it's opposite. And you would think, oh, well, that's not a big deal. I mean, but it really does end up being, can be. Sometimes it's never noticed, but most of the time it can be a big deal because you got to think about how blood's flowing into the heart and how it's flowing back out. And these vessels is where it becomes a big problem because there can be confusion sometimes. The heart built backwards, but the vessels didn't necessarily get the message to build backwards. So it could be a problem with getting blood flow correctly into the heart. Situs perversus is this variation in here. So here we have normal kidney placement, right? And notice that they're not like level. You do actually have them offset a little bit right here. See, so they're offset a little bit. But this kidney here is in the right place, and this one's way low. Okay, so that can be a problem with flow from into the bladder. Notice that the adrenal glands are still in the right place. So I have the adrenal gland that's supposed to be right on top of the kidney, and this one, the adrenal gland is in the right place, but the kidney is in the wrong place. You can have this horseshoe-shaped kidney, so both kidneys are attached together. Here's hearts that are normal here with the blood pattern, so the vessel pattern coming out of it is normal, but notice that we've got here, like this is the aorta, and you might have differences in the branching pattern coming off of that, and that may or may not be an issue. It just depends on, you know, where it branches to, as long as everything's getting blood in there, so you might have differences there. Okay, like I said, you do need to know the organ systems. Even though we're not going to cover all of them in this class, you still need to know the organ systems for this intro part, with a basic understanding of what they are and what they do. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of this. And there's 11-ish organ systems. Okay, but 11 according to the chapter, so that's what we're going to go with. So the integumentary is the first, and that's basically just your skin and everything that's related to skin. So the hair, the nails, the sweat glands, you know, some muscle, and all of those sorts of things there. But basically your skin is to protect, keep things out so that it doesn't get in, so protect you from microorganisms and stuff, allow you to regulate your body temperature. When you get hot, you're going to sweat, so heat leaves. If you get cold, you're going to constrict your blood vessels and keep the blood flow from going to the extremities, and you're going to start shivering, which is muscle contraction, and muscle contraction generates a little bit of body heat so that you can maintain your constant body heat. It also helps to synthesize some products, so like sweat and oil and stuff as part of that, that integumentary system. Support and movement are a combination of two systems, so skeletal and muscular, and they both kind of do both, all right? So the skeletal system are these rigid objects that we call like levers, rigid objects that are a solid piece, okay? And it takes the movement, the muscle attached to it to actually move that lever. So like here, if I wanted to raise the arm up, you would have muscles that pull on this bone right here so that it changes position. So it's the muscles here pulling on the skeleton there, and that creates that change in shape, so therefore the movement that's occurred. But also, in addition to that, your skeletal system produces blood, it stores minerals, okay? It protects, so you've got the cranium right here that protects your brain. You've got the thoracic cavity right here with the rib cage that protects your heart and lungs. You even have the pelvic cavity down here that helps protect your and support your abdominal organs. So protection and support. You've got posture, you know, sitting upright or whatever, your posture in there. And again, like I said earlier with body heat, when you get cold, you start to shiver. Your body heat of 98.6-ish. It's not really at 98.6 all the time, but 98.6-ish is due to the fact that your muscles are contracting and doing work, and they're producing body heat for you to allow you to maintain that constant body temperature, and then sweat when you need to get rid of some of that excess body temperature. Integration and coordination. So in other words, telling every part of your body to do what it needs to do to maintaining constant contact with all parts of your body. If I decide I need to stand up, I need to send messages from my brain that says, made that decision, I would like to stand up, to my leg muscles and my abdominal muscles and everything to do the right amount of contraction to get that action to occur. So it is the job of the nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, and all the nerves that come off, to send those nerve impulses that are basically directing the activities of those muscles, and also glands and all other organs in there too. In addition to that, you have the endocrine system, and the endocrine system is primarily chemical messengers. So nervous systems can be these electrical impulses. Okay, primarily. There's some chemical involved there, but we'll save that for when we do that. But endocrine system is primarily chemical signals. So this is endo right here. So you have things like the pituitary up here that sends out information that controls the actions of all of your other glands and tells them what to do. As far as growth hormone or hematopoietin that produces blood cells, or insulin or glucagon or whatever, all of those chemical messengers, hormones you have in your body that tells your body what to do. So we have two systems that are for that coordination of other body parts: nervous and endocrine. Transport is the job of two things: cardiovascular, CV for short, and lymphatic. Cardiovascular, most of y'all are familiar with. That's the heart. The cardio part, vascular are all the veins and vessels. They transport blood around, which transports oxygen, nutrients like glucose, and waste products that you have to get rid of, like carbon dioxide and nitrogen waste and stuff from cellular metabolism. So it distributes things around your body, distributes nutrients to the cells, takes waste products away from the cells. Also takes oxygen to the cells from the lungs and takes carbon dioxide away from the cells to the lungs so you can get rid of it. So distributes gases in there too. And that part of that endocrine function. The endocrine system produces the chemical messengers, but the chemical messengers have to make it to your cells somehow. It's the job of the cardiovascular system to pick up those chemical messengers and send them on their way. Lymphatic system is probably one you're less familiar with, and this one tends to get skipped over. Even if you did like body systems in high school, for some reason, lymphatic system a lot of times gets left out. But this is another fluid system. Notice it's also got vessels. I mean, we think of vessels as being veins and arteries, but look here, you've got a whole different set of vessels here. Job of lymphatic system is varied. There's a couple things there. It does help to pick up fat from digestion. So you can see here, you've got a lot of these little green things are lymph nodes. You have a lot in the abdominal cavity. The lymphatic system picks up fats from what's being digested in your digestive system. It picks up fluid. So if you've been sitting a long time, like on an airplane or bus or a car ride or whatever, you've been sitting a long time, sometimes your ankles will swell. That's because as you bend your knees, you're not allowing for fluid that's been leaking out into these cells to be returned up into your cardiovascular system. It's getting blocked off here, the knees, because they're being bent. So it is the job of the lymphatic system to return fluids that leak out of your cells, return them back to the cardiovascular system to be redistributed. The swelling is just an indication it's not doing that. Pregnancy will do that too sometimes. So you put a little pressure on it, sometimes it's not working right. And another function is that, it's not on there, but the lymphatic system works with the immune system to help with the filtering of like bacteria and stuff like that. That's what a lot of those lymph nodes, see all those lymph nodes all around? You got them here, you got them here. Notice when you're sick, like your throat hurts, you start pressing here, you're feeling for lymph nodes. If they're swollen, they're filtering out bacteria, and that's an indication that you've got some sort of infection. So they're doing their job, is what they're doing. All right, absorption and excretion. Excretion is not to be confused with the final product of your digestive system, okay? Excretion is really urinary system, so it's liquid, all right? But your digestive system brings in the food, brings in the water. So you bring that in here and it goes through, and through the process of the digestive system, you're going to break it down, that's digestion, and then you're going to absorb it through the tissues into your circulatory system to be distributed throughout your body, right? The end product, whatever doesn't get digested, is really called feces, and that's not excretion. That's part of digestion. So that's the fecal matter is the end product of the digestive system. Urine is part of the urinary system, or sometimes known as the excretory system. Okay, urine, sweat, that kind of stuff is excreted substances. So your blood vessels bring blood in to the kidneys, and the kidneys filter that, and whatever's useful goes back into your bloodstream. Whatever is waste will go out as urine, and that can include excess water. So that's your urination there. That's excretion. Also, some sweat is excretion too, getting rid of some salty waste. And then respiratory system is the exchange of gases. So oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. It's not 100%. It's just like 50% both ways, but um, it's enough that we need to get enough oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. So gas exchange. And oxygen is really, really important for the production of energy in your body. Without oxygen, you'll die pretty quickly because you can't produce energy, and your cells need flow of energy. Like within 3 seconds, a cell will die if there's zero energy there. So you need to have oxygen available and nutrients like glucose available to the cells to produce that energy. Reproduction. Repro system is for obviously making progeny and offspring. So you have the male and the female reproductive system. But there's also that endocrine function. So the testes produce testosterone, the ovaries produce, estrogen and progesterone and stuff. So you do have that endocrine function there too. We only go all the way up through the nervous system. So everything past the nervous system is going to be the subject of next semester. From endocrine forward is really next semester. So this is there, but you're not going to do it. All right. Characteristics of life. If we're going to talk about you as a living organism, we really need to determine what it means to be life. And there are characteristics of all life, and then there's characteristics of human life, okay? So some of these things are characteristics of every living organism on this planet, whether it's a bacterium, a fungus, a plant, or you, right? Or any other animal. And then there's characteristics of human life. I'll kind of point out the difference between them. Movement. Movement is not a characteristic of wildlife. Movement is a characteristic of animals, really. Plants don't move, they're still living. Fungi don't move, they're still living. But for animals, it's pretty vital for most animals to move, because you have to, in most cases, maybe not us, but most cases, you either have to search out your prey for food, or you have to avoid being prey for food. So that is kind of vital for animal life in there. So it's a change in position, motion. Responsiveness. Every living organism has to respond to a changing environment, either on a cellular level or on that macro level in some way. You flinch as something comes towards you. That would be larger than a cellular level. You change your body temperature in response to, you walk outside and it's hot and your body temperature goes up a little bit. You have to respond to that elevated temperature and sweat to get your body temperature back down. So you have some sort of stimulus, heat, whatever it is, light, whatever it is, and then you respond to that and make a change to that, or else your cells are it could be damaged from that. Growth and development. All living things grow in development to a certain amount. Bacteria don't really grow a whole bunch, but they do grow a little bit. They really don't develop from one shape to another. However, fungus, plants, animals, we do. We go from, like as a human, we go from a fertilized egg, zygote, to a multicellular blastula, gastrula group of cells, to gastrula starts you've got the differentiation process going on. So we become, nervous tissue and heart tissue and all of that. You become a fetus, you become a baby, a child, adult, and you continue over your lifespan. Even if you don't continue to grow, you're going to continue to develop and change throughout your lifespan. Reproduction is vital for all organisms to have the ability to do. Doesn't mean you have to do it, right? If every single human being chooses not to reproduce, it's going to be a dead end to our species. So it's kind of bad news. If every single organism loses the ability to reproduce, then it's a dead end to their system. But not every single organism within that species actually has to reproduce. You can choose never to have kids. Doesn't mean you just forfeited your life. You're still living until the point that you aren't living. You just aren't reproducing. So the ability to be able to reproduce is a characteristic of life, or else life won't continue. Respiration is vital for all living things. We have to have energy in the form of ATP, and in order to, and I just want you to start associating energy with ATP. I mean, it's not all energy, but that's what we kind of want to get to at most points. So if you think of those, you see here ATP, think energy. Energy can be other forms, but ATP usage in the cell is how we use energy in the cells. In order to do that, to produce that ATP energy to keep those cells alive, we're going to have to bring in oxygen. We're going to have to get rid of a waste product called CO2. You breathe it out. And you're going to have to release energy from food. So food like the glucose that comes from, the carbohydrates that you ate, or the proteins from the meat that you ate, or whatever. You have to get those components out, either to help with growth, like proteins will be building structures and stuff, or the glucose to help build that energy. So respiration is not the physical act of breathing. That's breathing. Bringing air in, bringing air out. That's breathing. Respiration is not that. Respiration is taking the oxygen that you breathed in and utilizing that to make energy. Okay, so think of it on a cellular level, not on this macro level. Digestion. Digestion is obviously very important for animals. We have to take the food that we brought in, since we can't make our own like plants can. We have to bring in food and break it down into smaller and smaller pieces. You cannot take that little piece of steak that you ate for dinner last night and immediately take it into the bloodstream. You've got to break it down into these really, really microscopic pieces so that it can then be absorbed across the intestinal lining into the blood vessels. And then the blood vessels, body fluids that are in those blood vessels, are going to distribute that throughout your body to your cells. That's called circulation, circulated around your body to distribute, so that these cells can then assimilate those particles and use those different chemical forms to build things. Okay, so we need to use that for building, for chemical reactions. I'm going to use the shorthand RXN for reaction. Build structures, use it for chemical reactions, whatever it needs. We need that originally came from this food up here, had to go through all of these different levels in order for you to actually be able to use it in your cells. And then once we've used it, then we're going to have to get rid of the waste products, carbon dioxide, get rid of nitrogen waste, whatever it is that we have to get rid of. And then we have excretion. So that's the removal of those waste products. So the cells themselves, as they produce the waste products, are going to put those waste products back into the circulatory system. So back up here to circulation. Circulatory system will take carbon dioxide to the lungs. You breathe that out. It will take blood with the waste products to your kidneys. Your kidneys are going to filter out the waste products and hopefully recycle the good things, put them back in your bloodstream, like water and glucose and that kind of stuff. So they don't take everything out. Just take the waste products out and release that as urine. But metabolism is this process of assimilating and using the chemicals that we absorb during digestion, but you also make waste products in that process. So we have to get rid of those waste products that you built during metabolism, metabolic events. Water. You guys are like 65% water. Water is the most abundant chemical in your body. You have more of it than anything else. If you dehydrate, you are in real danger of killing those cells. And the reason why it's so abundant is we need it for every single chemical process you go through. So all those metabolic processes, water is going to be involved in some way. Again, the following chapters, we're going to talk about the use of water in that. But it's either put into something or it's taken out of a chemical reaction. So it's really necessary for those chemical reactions. Your bloodstream and your lymphatic system are primarily water. There's other things in there. There's proteins, there's blood cells, there's fat, there's whatever that's in there, platelets and all kinds of stuff. But the majority of that blood is going to be water, and it's moving things around your systems to all of those tissues. And it helps regulate body temperature. What do you do when you get hot? You sweat. Water has this really good ability to absorb heat. So if you've got excess heat in the environment, water absorbs it. Then you dilate your blood vessels, meaning you open up, your blood vessels get larger on your extremities. So it comes to the surface, like across the surface, across your face. Your face gets red, flushed, right? Because your blood vessels are dilating. And that heat then is allowed to be released as the water, the sweat rises to the surface of your skin. The heat is released from that, generally, unless you live in Houston where we have high humidity, and then it gets to the surface and it just kind of sticks there, and then you just feel worse. So high heat is not too bad. Like a dry heat, the sweat works really well, and the sweat releases, and you sweat it, all that heat out, right? And so your body temperature stays cool. In very humid areas and high heat, you have a problem because your body temperature is going to raise. You're going to try and sweat, and you're not going to get that heat out. So it becomes much more uncomfortable, and it can become dangerous at certain levels too. All right, food is a requirement. Food is necessary for all kinds of things. We got to have glucose for energy. Okay, so you have to have sugar for energy, and glucose gets, and sugar gets a bad word, but that's our basic energy supply there. You have to have protein for building structures. So this is going to be building structures like bones and muscle and stuff, but it's also protein is just like one of the most used types of molecules out there. So your immune system, your enzymes, so digestion plus other enzymatic functions, all kinds of things. So proteins have to be used to build into these things in there. You're going to have to use fats. Fats are part of your cell membranes, okay? Obviously, fat is a huge energy storage, so you have it for energy also. It's, again, one of those necessary things. You don't want anything in excess, so glucose in excess or carbohydrates in excess, fats in excess, that's all bad. But it is the raw materials for building everything you need, and also those vital reactions. But also on the micro scale, nutrients that we need. We need micronutrients like vitamins and minerals, right? So we have to have vitamins and minerals also as part of that food that we intake. So there's a lot of things that are brought in through food. Oxygen, I talked about the importance of oxygen earlier. Oxygen is, it's not what you don't breathe in. Well, when you breathe in, it's not majority oxygen. It's only about 1/5 of the air, but it's necessary to take the glucose, proteins and fats, but primarily glucose, release the energy so that you can produce that ATP energy that can be used by the cells. Without it, your cells will die. So within about 3 seconds, without having oxygen to those cells, you can store some, by the way, in myoglobin and stuff. But once that runs out, once you've depleted the oxygen requirement to the cells, it doesn't take long for the cells to die. So when I say 3 seconds for the cells to die, that's without ATP. That's not necessarily that you're not breathing for that amount of time. You're breathing and you're bringing oxygen in, and you have oxygen circulating. So that would be the cell by itself without making ATP with oxygen. Does that make sense? If not, let me know. Heat is another requirement that is necessary. So it is a form of energy. We have to maintain around, I say around a 98.6 degree Fahrenheit. That really is not that accurate. That determination was made in the late 1800s, and the doctor that made that determination said humans are about 98.6 on average. That was based off of just men. So all he did was test men. Women, ours is a little bit lower, and there's been some evidence that our body temperature overall, men, women, whatever, has dropped a little bit over the past century or so. But 98.6, and it's not always at that amount. You can be, so at 98.6 ish. You can go a little above that, you can go a little below that. As long as you're within this sort of acceptable range, we're good. You go outside that range, then too high is going to indicate there's something wrong. If you start to go above that, you sweat to kind of cool back down into that range. But if it continues above that, there's something wrong. You're sick. If it's below that hypothermic, then again, it's going to indicate that there's something wrong that needs to be dealt with. But heat is necessary for the chemical reactions in your body, so the metabolic reactions. We have to maintain at that. We spend a lot of our food energy in trying to maintain that body temperature. Pressure. Pressure is really important. Blood pressure, right? Lung pressure, those are things that we think of. So atmospheric pressure is really important in allowing for breathing. When you breathe in and breathe out, there's no like pump inside your body that sucks that in or whatever. All you're doing is you're changing there's my chest cavity here. So you're changing the size of this cavity in here. When I'm breathing in, all I'm doing is my diaphragm, which is down, way down here. So the diaphragm contracts and moves down. That increases the space in that chest cavity. Also, the muscles between your ribs pull so that your rib cage expands. Once again, now I've just increased that area inside that thoracic cavity. Something has to fill that area, so air rushes in. So that has to do with atmospheric pressure, and obviously outside atmospheric pressure is going to play into the moving in and out too. Then when you breathe out, your diaphragm moves back up into its original position, so decreasing the size of the thoracic cavity, and the muscles between your rib cage pull that rib cage in, so it puts pressure back down. I've just made this space smaller. Something has to leave. Air rushes back out. So that's how you're breathing in there, and that has to do with pressure differentials that you're creating within that cavity, and also with the atmospheric pressure from exterior, like going high in the mountains, down low, or whatever. Those have differences on your breathing too. Hydrostatic means, hydro means water or fluids, right? Hydrostatic pressure is what we think of as blood pressure. So it's needs to stay within a normal range in order to actively circulate your blood through your body. All right, I am going to stop right there, and I'll pick up with the rest of this on part 2.